And that's been argued and tried and argued and tried over and over and over and over again. Interestingly, the data on this has been looked at and studied and compiled many different times, and many different studies have been done on this. What is the success rate of those who live together before they're married versus those who do not, who wait to live together until they are married? And the data is consistent and conclusive. If you live together before you're married, you're at a much higher, greater risk of either not getting married at all or getting married and getting divorced. And the data is clear on that. And everybody's looked at it and they've tried to explain it and tried to work around it, and that's just the data. Those who live together before they are married are more likely to either never get married or to get divorced if they do get married than those who wait until they're married to live together. Now, on the surface of it, just looking at it from a purely human point of view, that doesn't make any sense. Just from a human point of view, it would seem that, you try this out and you see if it works, and then, you would have more compatibility. It would give you a better start on your marriage, something like that. That's what people continue to think. But that's not the way it works out. Why is that? Because the whole thing is rigged. Have you ever gone to the carnival or the state fair where they've got the carnival games and all that? That you can never win the really big stuffed animal prize? Why is that? Because the games are rigged. They look easy. I remember my brother and I were at the state fair one time. We're standing there and they had this basketball hoop and you had to stand in a certain place and bank it off of this and into the basket. We thought, we can do this. And I don't know how many quarters we wasted on this game. And we could not do it. And the guy that's there goes, oh, it's real easy, you just do this. But the thing is rigged. They've got it angled a certain way, and that's the whole point. The whole game is rigged so that it's extremely difficult to win. They're going to win the vast majority of the time. Marriage and relationships and sex and all that is rigged. By who? By God. God set it up. This is the way I designed it to work. If you deviate from what I have designed it to do, it doesn't work out so well for you. And the data shows this. So we have two approaches to talking to people about this. One is the clear and consistent message of Scripture. Sex and marriage, living together, all of that is designed by God in this way. One man, one woman, committed marriage relationship for life only. That's it. And we can go to all kinds of different places in Scripture and talk about that. We can also talk about it from the other side. What does the data show? The data shows that those who abide by God's designed marriage plan and God's design for relationships and sex and all of that, those who abide by that, it turns out they are successful in that. They are more successful in marriage, in longevity in marriage, in lack of divorce, in happiness in marriage than anyone else. Those who deviate from God's design, what does the data show? It does not work. It does not work most of the time. Every once in a while you get one that does, but most of the time it does not work well. So that has been consistent throughout all of the studies that have been done. Questions or comments? Yes. Okay. Is it unfortunate that Christian marriages, the divorce rate among Christians is 50%, which is what it is among the non-Christians? Actually, that statistic is false. We've bought into a false statistic. And the reason for that goes back to how the statistics are done. Because a large majority of Americans over the past decades have identified as Christians but weren't really Christian, that's skewed the results. So when you boil down to those who are actually Christians, the divorce rate among actual Christians is much, much lower than the rest of the society. So that's the good news. The divorce rate among actual Christians is much lower. The satisfaction rate among married Christians is much higher than anybody else. And that's a statistic we can go out there and correct, because that's been false for a long time. Just because they've been processing the data based on anyone who claims to be a Christian, which used to be 85-90% of Americans, but the actual number was much like now. The actual number of actual Christians in America is about 7 or 8% of the population. When you start asking them, not do you call yourself a Christian or have you ever been to church, but what do you actually believe, then you get the real numbers. And so it's just under 10% right now. But the divorce rate for actual Christians is much lower. Yeah. Yes? Right, right. Yeah, it is. So when you're dealing with these kinds of questions with people, we have to recognize it is a larger worldview issue with them. That this is just one issue in a much larger pool of issues. Right, which they would have trouble trying to figure out what you're explaining to them, depending on their worldview. But interestingly, it does give you it gives you the inroads of saying, here's what the data shows. I'm not arguing from Scripture. I'm arguing from here's what the data shows. If you go out there in the world and you look at people living together before they're married, here's what happens. Now, let's talk about why that is. Why might that be? And begin to work through worldview issues with them. But yes, it is a much, for people that are asking that question, there's a much larger set of issues going on pertaining to worldview. Yeah. All right. So let's move to next question. Where was Jesus for the 3 days that he was dead? So the biblical answer to this question is we don't know. The Bible doesn't, he died, he was buried, 3 days later he rose. There isn't any passage of Scripture that deals with what happened between his death and his resurrection, other than he was buried and the tomb was sealed and all that going on. But we have no insight into what happened between those. Now, there are a couple of passages of Scripture that people have used to conclude some different things. So if we look at Ephesians 4, so Ephesians 4, 8, 9, and 10, it says, therefore it says, when he, Jesus, when he ascended on high, he led captive a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. Now this expression, he ascended, what does it mean except that he also had descended to the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is himself also he who ascended far above the heavens, that he might fulfill all things. And so some have concluded from verse 9 that if he ascended and he descended to the earth or the lower parts of the earth, then this must mean that he went to, he descended to hell and whatever he did there, and then ascended on high. So there are three possible understandings of where he descended to. One is he descended to hell. A second would be he descended to the grave. And a third would be he descended to the earth. Because we don't have any indication that he descended to hell anywhere else in Scripture, but he did descend to the grave, I think it's a better option to understand him here descending to the grave. The being dead, the place of the dead, that idea of descending to the grave seems to fit more with the story that we have laid out, the narrative that we have laid out, than that he has actually ascended into hell. There just isn't any indication of that anywhere else. But some have used Ephesians 4:9 to back that idea. I just don't think that's the best understanding of this particular passage. So he descended to the lower parts of the earth. In this case, I think the best understanding of that would be the grave. We could also go to 1 Peter.
Can I follow up on
Sure, yeah.
It says there that he led captivity captive. So would you not say that he went to Sheol and then proclaimed, like, to the dead that he rose from the, or he's going to rise from the dead, that he has victory, and that he brought the saints that were believing from the Old Testament to...
There are some who have concluded that. There just isn't enough in the, I mean, that's all speculation. That's not in the verse itself. So, but there have been some who've concluded that kind of idea. Yeah. And it's not completely outside the realm of possibility there. I just think, I want to be careful we're not adding too much to the text that's just not really there to begin with. So I just want to be careful with that. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19, we'll back up to verse 18. Christ died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who were once disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark. And it goes on from there. And so there are those who've concluded from this passage that Jesus, when he died, went and proclaimed to these spirits, which is what it says here. The question is, who are these spirits? So these spirits are the ones who were kept waiting in the days of Noah, or who were disobedient in the days of Noah when God was waiting patiently. But it doesn't explain any more than that, or where they were either. And so we've got to we would have to speculate to put anything else to this, because it's just not explained here or anywhere else. And so there have been a number of attempts to explain this. One is that he went to Hades or Sheol and proclaimed to the disobedient people of the days of Noah there. That's possible. Again, that's just speculation because we don't have that idea anywhere else explained, and it's not enumerated here either. And there are so there's that idea that he went and spoke to them after his death, before his resurrection. Another possibility, some think that Jesus spoke through Noah to the people of his day in the Old Testament, back in Genesis. That's possible. That just doesn't seem to fit the ideas here of verse 18, speaking about Christ in his death and for us on the cross. Another possibility is that in his resurrection, Jesus went and spoke to the disobedient spirits who were imprisoned, which I think fits better with the whole of this passage here, that it's talking about that he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, but he did this when alive in the spirit. So he's put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation. the nearest referent for that, when he went and made proclamation, is at the end of verse 18. He did this when he was alive in the Spirit. So he's put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, and in the Spirit he went and made proclamation to them. And so so because of that, I lean toward this being in his resurrection, he went and preached to these disobedient spirits who were at the time of Noah back there in Genesis.
You would say that he did that in the 40 days that he was alive?
Well, after his resurrection, yeah. In that, yeah.
Before he went to heaven?
Right, yeah. Just because of the end of 18, because the referent there from 19 would be in the Spirit, not in the flesh or in death or something like that. If that part wasn't there, then I think you could go the other route with him going in his burial in death to speak to them. But I think because he says in the Spirit he went and did this, I tend to lean that direction. Again, none of this is spelled out in the passage. We're just trying to kind of put together what might be based on what we have here. So these are really the only two passages that even mention something about the possibility of what happened to Jesus while he was in the grave, in the tomb. So it's all the things we hear about. He went and spoke to the dead, or these kinds of things, whatever it might be, preached in hell or whatever, come from these two passages. The problem is these two passages tell us very, very little about what we're trying to ask and answer. So what did Jesus do? What was he doing during those 3 days? We don't know for sure. And so anything about that, the Apostles' Creed has Jesus died, was buried, descended into hell. That descended into hell part is not biblical in terms of we don't have a biblical verse to pin that on. It was added into the Apostles' Creed after the Creed was originally written. It was added in later, but became part of the Creed. It's not completely outside the realm of possibility. We just don't have a biblical verse that we can point to and say, right here it says Jesus descended into hell and then rose again. So we just have to be really cautious about, we're speculating here, which is okay to do some of, we just have to be careful about that. Yeah?
So how do you think it fits in Luke 23, 43, where Jesus tells the people on the cross, that truly I tell you today you'll be with me in paradise?
Yeah, so when Jesus tells the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise, which is also we're dealing with, okay, so what happens there? So somehow, they both die that day, and they are in paradise, which is one reason to call into question the idea of Jesus being in hell for 3 days, because it seems to contradict what he told the thief on the cross. So, and what he says there to the thief is the only thing that we have clearly where Jesus or anyone else says that where Jesus was going at some point between his death and his resurrection. So that's the only one. You'll be with me in paradise today. So they die and enter into paradise. Now, does Jesus then, at what point does he leave to come back to be resurrected? Is he in paradise until the actual resurrection? Those are questions that get thrown around too. But that's the only verse that really points to anything definitive about where he was going after his death, before his resurrection. And so that's why I think we got to be really careful about he descended into hell and those kinds of things. Because we just don't have enough to work with definitively on any of that. So yeah, the today you'll be with me in paradise is the only definitive statement we have about what is happening. We know that happened during that time period, so right after they died, but we don't know anything else. Yeah?
Don't you think that it seems to me the only other thing we have to steer our speculation that says what happened before that Old Testament time. The only thing we know about death and the afterlife is what Jesus said about Lazarus and the rich man.
Yeah, so can we assume that Jesus died and went to Abraham's bosom because that's where people went? We look at the parable that he tells about the